Christ Freedom Church, it is so good to be with you virtually. We got to meet in person last December. My name is Mike Johnny. I'm actually one of the board members that serves along Pastor Robert as he's been in the early days, the first year of your plant. And as you know, last weekend, he and Whitney had their third son, Ezra James, and so we're excited for them. And I get the opportunity to share with you, and I know it's not your normal setting. You get to see me here at my church in Southern California, but it's a great grace to be able to share with you. As we enter into the word, I want to just recap a little bit of what Lindy and Luke shared last week. And so Lindy, in speaking to the kids, just shared that the Psalms is this place where we see big emotions. We see the big emotions of joy and excitement, and then we also see the heavy emotions of sadness and anger. And I think that's a really great place for us to be in this season. And then Luke faithfully just walking through both where you as a church were and responding to just the heaviness of what's been going on in our nation, but also just pointing us to this lament in Psalm 94, asking the Lord to deal with wickedness in our world. And so with that in mind, I'm going to take the layup here, and I am going to preach Psalm 23. And so if you have a church background, I imagine you know it well. And even if you don't, I imagine you have heard it in some setting, whether that's a funeral or something else. But before I do that, let me say this. We live in Southern California, and so we are surrounded by the movie industry, and we think about and see movies all the time, maybe differently than the rest of the world. But one thing that's true no matter where you are is that oftentimes when you watch a movie or watch a show, you approach it kind of with this God complex. You approach it with this idea that you know more than the characters do because you know that that villain is around the corner, or you know that so-and-so sent the text to so-and-so that's setting up what's going to happen next. And so you get to kind of be on the outside of it, knowing the end of it, and maybe miss what it would feel like to walk through it. In fact, really good shows that can figure out a way to not let you know more than what the characters know, they're the shows that make you binge watch and draw you all the way in because you're not assuming the end because you feel like you've got more knowledge than the characters. And I want us to wrestle because Psalm 23 is so familiar, and it can be really easy for us to assume we know the end and miss what it is to walk through it. And so as we walk through Psalm 23, let me tell you the main idea and then give you a quick table of contents. Understanding the Lord's desire to guide us and dwell with us is foundational to our pursuit of him. In our table of contents in verses 1-4, we're going to see the Lord as this faithful shepherd. And then verses 5 and 6, we're going to see him as a gracious host. And so allow me to pray, and then we're going to jump right in. Jesus, thank you. Thank you, first and foremost, that regardless of distance, location, that we as a people are a people. That Christ's freedom is full of brothers and sisters because you, by the sacrifice of Jesus, God, you have called them sons and daughters. And so, Lord, I'm thankful that I get to be with brothers and sisters virtually. I'm thankful that I get to serve my brother Robert as he is in the early days of being dad of number 3. And I pray that, Lord, in the midst of a season that's been heavy with coronavirus and with dealing with all of the unrest in our nation and then dealing with all the personal challenges, that you would come near to us like a faithful shepherd and lift our heads as a gracious host. So I thank you for that. So in your name I pray. Amen. So Psalm 23, I'm going to read the entirety of it to you. And I want to invite you to even close your eyes and just listen as we walk through. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And so as we enter into this, this is a Psalm of David, and a lot of the Psalms will tell you the occasion that it was written. the season or what's going on. But this one doesn't actually give us much. It's just that it's a Psalm of David. But I love that he starts from this relatable experience to his own life. David was a shepherd, and he looks and he says that the Lord is my shepherd. And so there's so much packed into that one sentence. Even that very first indication of who the shepherd is, the Lord. When you see in your Bible Lord capitalized, it's actually pointing to something. It's not just a title, but it's actually God's covenant name. It's the idea of Yahweh. And so if you are walking through your Old Testament, you see that over and over again. And it's not just this general fuzzy idea of God. It's actually speaking to his covenant person. That this is the name that if you were reading through the book of Exodus and you see Moses walking up to the burning bush and you don't know what's going to happen next, when he asks, who should I say sent me? And he says, I am, or the God that is, he is saying his covenant name, that I'm Yahweh. I will do what I say I'm going to do. I'm faithful in all those ways. And I think that's important because that being true makes the rest of this make sense. That if God is this faithful, covenant-keeping, dependable God, and if that's true, then we see this situation of everything that's happening in our life differently. Everything that's in this psalm, we see it differently. We can trust him for rest. We can trust him for righteousness. We can trust him for protection. We can trust him for a place at the table. Like, if that's true, then we can wrap our arms around it. And Psalm 9 would say this: those that know his name trust him. There is this personalness with the Lord that David is speaking to that allows him to be confident in everything else that he would say. So let me give you an example from a friend of mine. I have a friend, his name is Michael Dan, but because his initials were MD, everybody in his family called him Doc from when he was a little kid. And so because of that, he goes to kindergarten or first grade, I don't remember which, but on that first day of school, the teacher's going through and, naming off people. And then she's like, Michael. And he's like, actually, I go by Doc. And she was like, excuse me? And he's like, I go by Doc. And she was like, you're not a doctor. Nobody's giving you an honorary doctorate. Like, you haven't been in school all those years to earn that name. I am not going to call you Doc. Which, pause, I don't understand why this lady was so angry about this kid wanting to be called Doc. Just let him go by his nickname. Enough so that she calls his mom and says, I have an issue. Your son Michael is expecting me to call him Doc. And his mom was like, well, everybody that loves him, that's what they call him. They know him by that name because of their relationship with him. And I love that David starts out by saying, let me start from a place of this affectionate relationship with the Lord, that not just this God of the universe, not just this idea of something that may be out there, but this specific, loving, covenant-keeping God, that he is my shepherd. And so he starts by this understanding of the Lord's ability to keep covenant. And then if that's true, then the next phrase becomes so much more powerful. I shall not want. And that means that I won't lack, that I won't be without, that he's not going to withhold from me what I need. And even in this season that we've been in, I could just stop there and just say that the Lord is faithful, keeps his covenant, and his love is unending for you. And to know him personally is to trust the power of his name, and therefore you should not want. And I could close my iPad and walk away, and that's enough in this season. But David would make that statement that I shall not want. And then he talks about the ways that he leads me to green pastures, that he allows me to lay down beside still waters, that it's this picture of these faithful paths, and it's this reminder of Eden. I mean, this description of how the Lord's faithfulness plays out, that he takes me to faithful places. And so I didn't say this earlier, but maybe it's important to say here that if the Lord is the shepherd, then the unfortunate reality is that we are the sheep. And if you know anything about sheep, sheep are not the sharpest animals in the kingdom. That sheep tend to be animals that they only follow the direction of the flock. And so if sheep don't figure out, hey, this is not a good way to go, and if 10 sheep go, number 11 will follow. Sheep don't tend to be able to think through, hey, there's no more vegetation here to feed me. And so they just kind of stay eating, and they must have a shepherd that would lead them to places. And so even for David to say, the Lord is my shepherd, therefore I'm sheep, and he leads me to places that can feed me, that he leads me to places of rest, that he leads me into faithful paths for his name's sake. Like I want to wrap our arms around that the way David's talking, it seems like he's talking about Eden. That he's leading us to these places of peace and faithfulness and rest and refreshing that we not only could not find on our own, but because of our own sinful foolishness that we avoided and ran away from. And then he makes this statement that I don't want to brush past too quickly. That he restores my soul. There's a lot of things in life that are marketed to restore something. My degree from the University of Oklahoma is actually in marketing. And thinking through what people want, we're often trying to basically give them the fountain of youth in different versions. And so when you watch a Gatorade commercial, when they're talking about the way that it replenishes energy so that you can have peak activity, or when you watch facial cream commercials and they're talking about that they can restore the youthfulness of your face. Or any number of things that are trying to promise you to bring you back or give you back something. All of those things are topical, but nobody has ever come out with a commercial that says, hey, I want to offer you a bottle of this product for $19.99 because it can restore your soul. Because there's something about the deeper, innermost parts of you that all of these external things can't do. And if all the Lord could do in his faithfulness was bring you into lush places of vegetation or walk you on the right path or give you places of rest, but not actually restore the most inner part of you, then it would just be a nice idea, but it wouldn't be what we fully need. In fact, what we're experiencing in this moment of our lives, as we're seeing just all of the brokenness that's in us and around us being revealed with every scrolling headline, is that we are deeply impacted and need our souls more than anything else to be restored. That if our bank accounts aren't okay, and if all of our distractions are gone, and if we're still locked down in our houses, I recognize you guys are in Texas and you got more freedom than I got, but if we're quasi-locked down and we can't go to the places that we want to go, that all of those things, when we had them, didn't restore our soul. It just covered up how weak and tired and thin our souls actually were. But David says, but the way my shepherd leads, in his faithfulness, he's doing something deep in me. He's doing something in the innermost parts of my being that Paul would later on say in 2 Corinthians, that my outer person is wasting away, but my inner person is being renewed, restored, revived, re-energized, re-strengthened, replenished day by day. And there's nothing around us that can do that. It's only our faithful shepherd that does that. And then he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. That language of the valley of the shadow of death, it actually translates to the shadow of the shadowiest places. It's the deepest darkness. That David would say that my shepherd would walk with me through the deepest darkness. Wasn't just this ethereal idea. There's this reality that oftentimes when shepherds were trying to take their sheep to places of vegetation, they would have to cross through valleys. And oftentimes there would be, because of the way that the mountain terrain worked out, there would be these deep, dark shadows in those valleys where robbers would hide or raiders would hide, and they would attack people. And so to say that I will fear no evil when I have to walk through those places, not just physically, but the reality of the darkest nights of my soul, that I'm going to have to go through them. But the reason that I'm confident is because you are with me. Christ Freedom, can I just tell you in this season that the Lord's with you? That as dark as it may seem, that you might not be able to see very far past your face. And I don't just mean that physically. I mean that in the reality of you don't understand how tomorrow's going to work out. And maybe you're feeling anxious and terrified that you're just going to see another story or hear another bit of news that's going to make you feel like, how are we going to make it through this one? Here's how we make it through. The Lord is with us. That his rod and his staff comfort us. And that's interesting language because the staff makes sense. That's what the shepherd uses to lead and to guide. But the rod it was like a policeman's billy club that he would use in close range fights to fight off an enemy. And so that the Lord is using this rod to get in close and fight and protect when things would be pressing on you. That he's not standing outside of your darkness and trouble and saying, good luck, I'm praying for you, I hope you figure it out, but that he's in the midst of it defending you, that this is how David has seen his faithful shepherd. And then in verses 5 and 6, the language shifts a little bit. And he begins to talk about the Lord as a host. Let me read them again. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And this language of you prepare a table for me, that in that culture, to eat at someone's table is this level of relationship and acceptance. It's this that I've let you in, that you've moved past the outer portion of my life and you've moved into the inner portion. And it's actually this sense of deep affection and bondedness with that person. But to say that you've prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies is really interesting language. We don't know when David wrote this or why he wrote this. But we do know from the stories of David's life that he actually has an understanding of what that would be like. And so if you don't know David's story, David is the 8th son out of 8 of a man named Jesse. And Jesse had a prophet named Samuel come to the house. And Samuel says, hey, the Lord has told me that Saul's family the current king will no longer be king after him. And one of your sons is going to take the throne. And David wasn't even called into the house. He was out being a shepherd, and he was ignored initially. And Samuel said, hey, none of your 7 sons are the one. Is there anybody else? And he's like, oh yeah, David, we should get him. And so they bring David in the house. And Samuel anoints him and calls out that he's going to be king, which is just a magnificent moment in his life. But the problem with that is kingship doesn't roll on 4-year cycles. He's not winning the next election. Like for Saul to no longer be king, he needs to die. And so David is a very specific threat to him. And then when David shows up publicly on the scene, when there's this battle between Philistia and Israel, and the Philistine champion Goliath is intimidating everybody and nobody wants to fight, and David's like, I'll fight him, and David kills him, David starts getting some acclaim. And so people start singing songs. Like, you've done something magnificent when people make up songs about you. And so they're like, Saul's killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. And then Saul has this spirit that's been given of the Lord that's like stirring him into agitation, and he invites David in to play his harp and give him peace. And he would like throw spears at David. Like, who has spears in their house to throw at people? But all of this is going on. And so David has this adversarial relationship, not because of anything that he's done towards Saul, but because of Saul's broken-hearted rebellion and his feeling threatened by this new incoming king. And so there's a moment, because David is great friends with Saul's son Jonathan, where Jonathan's like, hey, you've got to come and be part of the family. You've got to come to the table. My dad's going to be angry, in fact, if you don't show up. And David said, I'm not safe there. And so they devise this plan where David's hiding in a field, and Jonathan's going to shoot an arrow. And if he shoots it past David, he needs to run. If he shoots it in front of David, David can come in. And so he's going to be at a meal with his dad. And so Jonathan, as the son of the king, is sitting at the table with the king, who is angry and wants to crush David. And he's trying to make a place for him, and he's not able to. And so this line that David would write, that you make a place for me in the presence of my enemies, is not just this throwaway idea. It's this idea of David as this person who actually is innocent and who should be able to sit at the table, isn't able to sit at the table. Now, let me take it a step back and make it a little bit bigger. Because in the bigger picture of all of reality is that God is the king of the universe. And the reality is that we have been enemies of the state because of our sin. And we have no right to sit at the table. But yet, God, the Father's Son, Jesus, has made a place for us at the table that we who don't deserve to belong can sit at the table without fear and full of favor because he has made a place for us where we should be enemies. He has called us family and made us comfortable like friends. This is the graciousness of Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God who makes a place for us at the table. He would say that you anoint my head with oil. And this is a sign of leadership, that often when somebody was brought in, that there was an anointing that was put on their heads, whether priests or kings. But it's also a sign of affection. Luke chapter 7, Jesus is in a situation where he's in the house of a Pharisee. And there's an interesting picture here that I want to pull out about the kindness of God towards us. So here's what it says, starting in verse 36. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her hair and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with ointment. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who's touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answering him said to him, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, say it, teacher. So just hear the boldness. He's thinking these thoughts, if Jesus was who he says he was, he wouldn't let this woman touch him. And Jesus wheels around and says, hey, Simon, I've got something to say. And there's all boldness. Say what you got to say, Jesus. Never put yourself in that situation. When Jesus says, hey, I got something to say to you, just humble yourself, start repenting of stuff. Everything that you can remember, go back to 3 years old when you stole those crayons from Walmart. Do what you got to do to be right with the Lord. So he tells him, say it. Verse 41, a certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii, which is 500 days' wages, and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more? And Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you not see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore, I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but he who is forgiven little loves little. Do you hear what Jesus just did there? He's giving this picture of, those who understand the kindness and the graciousness of God, that they show their affection by the way that they wash feet. They show their affection by the way that they provide an affectionate kiss. They show their love and affection by the way that they would anoint someone's head. Which is amazing to put that in the context of somebody who owes something, showing their appreciation for the person that's stronger. But let's flip the narrative, because this is not God who owes something to David. It's David who owes something to God, and God is treating him with deep affection and anointing his head. This is the gracious host that God is towards us. And then he ends with, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And that word follow is actually a weak translation. Follow has a weakness in that translation in the same way that following somebody on social media is a weak translation for friendship. But actually what it means is to pursue and to chase and to run down, to capture it. It's this active running. And so this idea of the goodness and mercy of God chasing after David all the days of his life, and he gets to dwell in the house of the Lord. What an amazing picture of a relationship with God. And so here's how I want to encourage you, Christ Freedom. In a season when it feels dark and difficult, You've got a faithful shepherd who keeps his promises, who leads you to rest and wholeness and restores your soul, who is with you in the middle of your darkness, who is protecting and fighting for you in the midst of what's happening around you. But he's not just this faithful shepherd that is proactively fighting and providing, but he's also this gracious host that wants to be with you. And I think that may be the harder thing for us to believe. Maybe because it's the way we were raised in church that God's kind of angry and all we've got to do is kind of appease him and make sure that we don't make too much noise so he doesn't get angry with us. Or maybe it's because we know us and we think that he wouldn't want to be with us, but that he would make a place at the table for us who should be enemies. That he would show his affection for us and that he would run after us with goodness and mercy. It's just such a good promise. So let me go back to our main idea. Understanding the Lord's desire to guide us and dwell with us is foundational to our pursuit of him. If you know that the Lord is faithful to keep his promises and that he is absolutely mad about you, what would keep you from wanting to spend time with him? If you knew that the Lord is sitting there saying, I'm into you. I want to keep my promises to you. I'm going to do what I said. I'm going to give you rest. I'm going to give you sustenance. I'm going to lead you to the right places. I'm going to be with you even when it's difficult. I'm committed to you. The Jesus Storybook Bible says it this way, that it's this never-ending, never-stopping, never-growing, tired love of God. Like if you knew that to be true, how does that lift shame off of you that keeps you from wanting to walk in and be with him? So even thinking about the season that Robert and Whitney are in, having number 3, there's something about, as a parent, and many of you know this, that your kids just have, in some ways, short memories. That they just like being with you. Like, maybe not if you've got middle schoolers and teenagers. They no longer think you're cool. They don't want to spend time with you at all. But when they're little, man, they think you're awesome. Like all your weird, nerdy quirkiness, they think it's cool. And they just want to spend time with you. And if you knew that the Lord, though he knows all, not just your quirkiness, but your rebellion and your sinfulness, and he's like, I'm making a place for you, and I'm keeping my promises to you, how does that lead you into time with him? I know one of the things you guys do together as a church on Friday mornings is that you have time together with God. And if you knew that the Lord and his desire to guide you and to dwell with you is waking up. He didn't wake up, but if he was there, if you knew that he was there early on Friday mornings saying, I can't wait till you show up, how does that change the way that you run after him? When you sit down and try and do your quiet time, and it's the hard days. It's not the days that you take Instagram pictures because you feel really holy. It's the days where you're like, I don't feel like I can get past the table of contents. If you knew that he's like, I just want to speak with you today. I just want to talk with you about where you're at. I just want to be in it with you. How does that change the way you would read the word? If you knew that you sat at the table with this gracious host who made space for you, how does it change the way that you make space for others? And so Christ Freedom, I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you that even over this week, I had the opportunity to preach this to my church back in January. And I said, I want to grow in this and I want to put some practical things around it. And so one of the things I challenged the church to do is, I don't know where you're at with your prayer life. I don't know if you pray 0 minutes a day. I don't know if you pray 23 minutes or 23 hours and 55 minutes a day. But the challenge is, can you just add 5 minutes to that this week? Could you believe for 5 more minutes that your faithful shepherd and your gracious host wants to be near to you, that he wants to hear you, that he wants to respond to you? And so this week, I would just challenge you to trust him in that way. And in that 5 minutes that you're adding to whatever your prayer life looks like right now, you can say, Lord, I want to be near to you because you want to be near to me. I'll also say this. that if you don't know him personally, all the rest of this falls apart. That if you've not trusted the Son, Jesus, who's made a way for you to be at the table, if you don't know him, then these are fairy tales that are written in somebody else's handwriting that aren't true about you. But if you've trusted Jesus, then you too can say, the Lord is my shepherd. That might be the most powerful word in all of that sentence. This sense of ownership of relationship with the Lord, that the God of the universe would know and be close to you. And so I just want to invite you today to trust the Lord, to know the Lord, and to enter in with him. Maybe it's just 5 minutes deeper. Maybe it's waking up early this following Friday and entering into time together with God. But I want to invite you to know that the Psalms can carry the weight of your big emotions, whether positive or negative, and that the Lord not is just hearing your laments, but is coming near to you in the midst of them. And so let me pray. Jesus, I thank you. I thank you that you have pulled us near by the blood of your cross. That we who were dead in our sins, who were children of wrath, who were enemies of the kingdom, had now been made alive and made sheep to a good, faithful shepherd, have been made children to a good father, have been made friends. And the way that you would speak it to your disciples is that we did not choose you, but you have chosen us and called us your friends. So thank you for being a faithful shepherd. Thank you for being a gracious host. Would the reality of that spur our hearts towards affection for you, pursuit of you, would cause us to push things off the table and out of the schedule of our lives, that we might spend time with you, and that even this week that the men and women of Christ's freedom would be encouraged to trust you just for 5 minutes more of your presence, and that they would live in that with joy. It's in your name I pray. Amen.